Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm Maddie Roach, your host for today's podcast. Alan Moore is enjoying his sabbatical. I'm excited to have Kingston Hollman on the podcast today, one of XYPN's compliance consultants. Despite being one of XYPN's newer compliance teammates, Kingston joins the department with a lot of experience. Not only has he been a financial advisor and firm owner himself, but he's spent time at the Department of Revenue and has completed over 100 audits as a regulator with the state of Minnesota. Today, we talk all about what advisors can expect when it comes to an audit, and Kingston is full of great tips. Kingston discusses what advisors can do to prepare for audits and make the best of the inevitable experience. Kingston highlights the importance of embracing a culture of compliance and how, with the right attitude and focus on organization, audits don't have to be that scary. He shines the light on how regulators of different states communicate with one another, how the regulatory team prepares to audit you, and most importantly, what to expect during the actual audit itself. Kingston reminds us that we should be as transparent and forthcoming as possible, but to also not be afraid to just simply answer the question being asked. We discuss worst-case scenario audits and some do's and don'ts while communicating with the regulator before and during the audit, and of course, what to do if there are any deficiencies identified. Compliance is a scary topic to all advisors, and it should be, but hearing tips from a former state regulator can help calm your nerves a bit. Kingston reminds us that regulators have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the citizens of their state and are looking to identify egregious and negligent errors, not necessarily to come down hard on the common errors that pop up from time to time. If compliance has been something you want to learn more about, or if you want to absorb some energy from Kingston about compliance as a topic, I encourage you to tune into this show.
XY Planning Network's annual benchmarking survey is out. Are you curious about the average number of clients XYPN members get in their first year, or how successful niches really are? To answer these burning questions and more, we've again enlisted a professional research firm to complete our annual benchmarking study. Get your copy hot off the press and discover vital statistics such as the median advisor revenue by years in practice and sources of firm growth, from referrals to blogging, social media, and more. Head over to xyplanningnetwork.com/study to purchase your copy today.
You can find any of the resources we mentioned during this episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/236. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Kingston Hollman. Hey, Kingston, welcome to the show.
Hey, Maddie, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I've been really looking forward to this conversation today. I know we've taken some time to parse through some of the things that we want to hit on today, but let's get to the real content for our listeners. Kingston, why don't you introduce yourself to us today?
Well, my name is Kingston Hollman, and I am a compliance consultant at XY Planning Network.
Wonderful. And did you come to XYPN as a compliance consultant, or what makes you qualified to be one, I should ask?
Absolutely. I did come to XY Planning Network as a compliance consultant. What makes me qualified is my background as a regulator.
Tell us about, just walk us through kind of post-college through the point of time where you joined the XYPN team. I know that you've done a lot and you've seen a lot, and we're going to get to a lot of that, but give us a rundown of your professional background.
So post-college, post-MBA, I was in the industry, actually. I worked for JP Morgan Chase and PNC, both in management and as an advisor prior to launching my own firm. After a brief tenure as a firm owner, I went to work for the Department of Commerce, actually the Department of Revenue, as a tax auditor for the state of Minnesota. And from there, I moved on back into the investment advisory world as a senior regulator. I was a senior examiner would be the official title, where I examined in-state and out-of-state firms.
And that is what we're going to talk about today. Kingston has so many nuggets of wisdom for our listeners about how to handle the compliance process, how to handle an audit if and when you are contacted by a regulator. But Kingston, I must ask, what transitioned, what happened between firm ownership to the Department of Revenue? That's a big switch.
Absolutely. So I guess it's one of the things where you have to know what you're good at. And one of the areas of expertise for me is research and interviewing and state regulation and compliance. So compliance became my specialty. It's my baby, something that I'm really passionate about. And I really enjoy educating others, i.e., firm owners or investment advisor representatives, on how to be compliant and basically how to protect what you work for. That's where I come in.
Love it. And how long did you spend at the Department of Revenue, and what was the position after that?
So at the Department of Revenue, I was there, brief tenure, roughly about 9, 10 months. And from the Department of Revenue, I moved over to for another 9 months with the Department of Commerce as a regulator prior to making the transition back to XY, where I started my investment advisory career as a firm owner.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Well, then let's dive in. I know that we are so thrilled to have Kingston on the team here at XYPN because he does provide that former regulator eye to many of the issues that we're handling and many of the issues our members are handling. And Kingston, I'd really love a majority of our time together really to be the nuts and bolts of how to prepare for what many firm owners are going to inevitably have to do, which is show the regulators what's behind closed doors. So I guess talk to me about when you were a firm owner from that perspective. What was your biggest concern, and what have you understood to be some of the main concerns for independent RIAs who are running small to mid-sized businesses?
So as a firm owner, you don't know what you don't know. Okay. So one of the biggest concerns for me, I didn't know how to prepare for a regulatory examination. I didn't know what was expected of me if and when I was examined. And from a compliance perspective, I knew absolutely nothing about compliance up until the point of launching my firm. I was focused on sales, prospecting, and growing the business. And that's what I knew.
Was it during your time as a firm owner that you figured out you actually loved compliance?
Ironically, yes. So it was the during the launch phase. I was very hands-on. So I was one of the very few who actually did my own ADV, part one, part two, compliance manual, things of that nature. So I did all of that on my own. And with the help of the regulator that I was working with, Lynn Barnett in Illinois, she was very helpful. And together I walked through it with her hand in hand, and I launched my firm. The amount of man hours, now hindsight, I would have hired either XY or a third party to take me through that process because my time could have been better used elsewhere in doing the things, hence learning compliance. So I was kind of forced into it. But that process alone actually prepared me partially to be a regulator.
Absolutely. And there are a number of members who do go out and use either XYPN's templates or at least some support of XYPN, but do file on their own behalf. And Kingston was one of them. So what was that process like working with the regulator? As so many members come in very, very scared of regulators and they think that anytime they call or have a question that they don't want to ask the regulator because that's going to raise red flags for them. I guess
Right.
talk to me about that feeling that a lot of members have, which is regulators are scary.
Yes, I had the same feeling. You know, the very first experience that I had with the regulator, it wasn't warm and fuzzy. It was very sharp, direct, and to the point. And it was through the back and forth exchange with working with the regulator to where you fostered, or where I fostered, a relationship. And once you foster a relationship, it's easy to have a dialogue in any area of compliance or need or concern.
Is that something we should urge members to facilitate? Is that relationship with the regulator something they should expect to have? Because from my understanding, there's hundreds of regulators, right?
There's hundreds across the US, but each regulatory department can be anywhere from 1 to 15 people per state. So they're not that big. And each one of the regulators within the department, it's siloed. So they have a different area of expertise. So I would urge members to reach out to their state's regulators and form a relationship with the registration person and also an examiner. And between those two people, they'll be able to piece the pieces of the puzzle together for you in the areas where you are not as knowledgeable in.
Absolutely. I know some members really do have quite good relationships with regulators after the registration process. If you're going through the XYPN registration process, we handle a majority of the communication with the regulators. But after the fact, they're the ones that will be showing up to your house or asking you for documents. So, to Kingston's point, developing a relationship and getting known isn't a bad thing. Kingston, since you lived it, what are some of the most important things advisors can do as they're starting out when it comes to compliance? And then we can get into if they ever did have the audit.
Absolutely. So, for newly registered firms, it's important to have organization. That is one of the most important things that you can do. Have a detailed filing system. Okay. That would be the first thing. And then, two, have written supervisory procedures or a compliance manual that says how you do things, when you do things, and how often you do them. And lastly, make sure you do those things and you will be smooth sailing. And then you will start to build a culture of compliance. And now you can go out there and do what you do best, and that's
Mm.
sales, prospect, and deepen relationships.
Unless they're you, and then just perfecting your compliance department is their favorite thing. So since your specialty has really been in the audit space, and that is something that you're going to be building out with the XYPN compliance team is potentially mock audits for some of our advisors and putting them through what really could feel like a real audit. What are kinds of things that a member should expect from a regulator during their tenure of running their firm?
Now, is this question asking me what should they expect? Is this before, during, or after an examination?
Let's say right before an examination. It sounds like there is some contact with the regulator to the advisor. If a regulator were to be reaching out, what would you expect to see or hear from them for?
So I guess we'll touch on the before. So before an examination, your dialogue or correspondence with a regulator would be an initial email or phone call introducing themselves and notifying you of a pending examination and requesting documentation from you. That's the extent before.
And from the regulator's perspective, what kind of review of of a member firm or an advisor firm have they done before they've even reached out to you? Because it sounds like they've done some upfront work.
Yes. So long before an examiner reaches out to you for that phone call to say, hey, you were notifying you of examination in 2 weeks, the examination team, and I say team because it's never just one, they've spent roughly 80 hours examining your internet and social media presence, your all publicly available documentation regarding your firm. They've even reviewed your state business filings to make sure that your LLC or corporation, however you've been incorporated or organized, is in good standings with the state and paid in full. And they've probably researched your website thoroughly. So in a nutshell, they know your firm as good, if not better than you know your firm.
Mm. We won't get into the details of what each of those items are and the responsibilities that go along with them, but we're at the point where the regulator emails you or calls you and says you have a pending audit coming up. What during that time should an advisor be doing?
That is a great question. At that time, if you are living a culture of compliance and you are very astute of the compliance activities that you need to do, there's nothing you need to do but provide them the documentation that they've requested. Now, if there's some gaps in your compliance culture or compliance obligations, you should probably reach out to a compliance consultant to get right prior to actually sending them the documentation. Maybe reach out to someone that can help you walk through the list and to take a look at the documentation that you are preparing to send to the regulator to make sure that that's how you want to represent your firm, because anything that you send the regulator is a direct representation of you, the advisor, and a direct representation of the firm and its compliance culture.
And what kind of gaps would an advisor have in their culture of compliance?
One gap would be failing to do your due diligence by researching the third parties that you engage in. So doing due diligence to make sure that they are the best possible option for your clients, failing to meet your fiduciary responsibilities. And when I say fiduciary, that means if you say you are going to do quarterly or monthly or annual reviews, that you're doing them. So your fiduciary responsibilities are doing what's best for the client at all times. So if you're failing to do any of those things, or if you're failing to do any of your supervisory and document, not just doing them, but documenting them. So you can do things and not document it. That's the same as not doing it. So if you do something, you have to document it as proof that you've done it. And that's a lot of times advisors do things, they don't document it, so therefore they haven't done it. And that would be a gap in your compliance procedures and in your compliance culture. And one other thing I wanted to touch on, for example, tools and resources. XY Planning Network provides members with Smart RIA. Smart RIA is a task management software. Now, the software itself is not the end all be all, but it does help notify you and give you reminders of certain key compliance tasks that need to be done and set intervals, either monthly, quarterly, or annual. And you don't want to fall behind on those things because those will lead to deficiencies. And deficiencies are things that you need to take note of.
Yeah. Let's do a hypothetical. Say I was an advisor that when I drafted my ADV, I was set on offering quarterly reviews of all things for my clients. Within a year, I've ramped up to 25 clients, and all of a sudden I've been doing check-ins every 6 months or so, reviews of everything every 6 months or so. I get an email or a contact from the regulator saying that an audit's coming up, and I've realized this discrepancy or this deficiency. Is that something that I would then reach out to the regulator proactively about, or would I hire a consultant, or how would I handle what I know to be discrepancies?
Got it. So discrepancy is regulator jargon. So that
Mm.
wouldn't be something that would just fluidly roll off the tongue of the advisor. Now, that would be so now if you were set up to do quarterly reviews and you're at 25 clients, that's 100 reviews a year. That is what you've done effectively is you've given yourself a job. Okay, you're already self employed. Now, anything that you disclose that you do, you're bound to do. So, as a best practice, don't bind yourself to tedious work. Now, if you can reasonably meet with 25 clients every quarter, great. Kudos to you because that right there is great customer service. It's showing that you're showing your clients that you care about them, that you want you want to see them meet their financial well-being and reach their long-term goals. Great. Now, if you decided to move to 6 months, as you alluded, you still care about them. You still want them to reach their long-term financial goals, and you still want them to enjoy the fruits of, the monies that they've saved and reach their goals. Well, every 6 months now, you've given yourself 50 tasks to do, right? A year. That's more manageable, and it frees up more time for you to do other things that may need to be done in the firm. It could be hiring, it could be prospecting, it could be growing the business, it can be doing operational things and developing a stronger compliance program. So if you come to the point where you realize that you're not meeting the quarterly reviews and you switch to 6 months, you don't have to notify the examiner. But what you do need to do, you need to update your ADV 2A, item 13. You would need to update that. Then you will go in and update your compliance manual to corroborate that that's what you do. And then you would have to document the reviews that you're having and put them in the client's file and retain those for 5 years. And you're done.
Wonderful. Let's talk a little bit more about if that audit is approaching. What are some to-dos for advisors to tackle before the auditor lands in their living room?
Okay. Land in your living room. So you are home office advisor, and you don't have to be home office, but get organized. Step one, get organized. When the examiner sends you out that initial documentation request, the examination date, up until that point, the examiner does not know what your office looks like. They do not know your filing system. They haven't seen your books and records. So I would begin to get organized and make sure that prior to the examiner arriving at my home or my place of business, that I can find, locate, and immediately access the documents that, or the record keeping documents that are per statute supposed to be readily available. You want to make sure that those are readily available.
Hmm. Awesome advice. And I appreciated when we were talking about this podcast that you were able to shed some perspective on what the regulators were doing behind the scenes as they prepare. And 80 hours just seems like so much time to be spent on one small firm. But I would love your perspective on why regulators are doing this and who are they protecting and what kind of attitude do they have as they come into an audit with a solopreneur.
Regulators have a fiduciary responsibility to the citizens and the taxpayers of their state, and they don't take that lightly. They have a vested interest because they're citizens of that state as well, and they're taxpayers. So they are solely and they're responsible for making sure that everyone pays their fair share and everybody is adhering to the statutes and the guidelines set forth by the regulatory body or who's ever in office at that time. So therefore, if they're going to uphold statute, they're going to make sure the only parameter or measuring stick that they have is the statute, and to make sure that every advisory firm is consistently obeying and following those statutes. So prior to an examination, they are reviewing statute, and there's a lot of statute. I'll give you an example. Minimum balance statute. Okay, well, if the minimum balance statute is 10,001 penny, well, they have to look at your bank statements to make sure that you meet that minimum requirement. Now, why is it so important? Solvency is very important. And I'm only using the minimum balance requirement as an example. Well, if you have $10,000 in at minimum at all times, if there was a trade error and you had to make a client whole again, they want to know that you have resources to do so. And that's where that comes in. And there's a whole slew of other areas, but that's just one of the guidelines that they take serious. They're protecting their mothers, their daughters, themselves, pensions, profit sharing plans. If the system crumbles, then there's a snowball effect, and they want to prevent that at all costs.
Understood. I appreciated you kind of explaining to me what the relationship between the regulators are and the statutes that they are kind of obliged to follow the regulations, and but then the state laws on top of it layer on top. So that's how we get that issue with regulators kind of vary from state to state. How they enforce different things varies from state to state, and that's very much because they're following state law as well. So I guess could you explain that a bit more, Kingston?
Investment advisors, you can be state registered or you can be SEC registered. Well, the whole investment advisor culture, it started with the SEC. So therefore, the Investment Advisory Act of 1940, that's where it started. So Section 204 and Section 204 and then A, and then there's several different subsections of that on the SEC level. Now, on the state level, the state has what they call an overlay, or they have their own statutes on top of the SEC of the act. So the SEC Act, the Investment Advisors Act, has state overlays. So with those state overlays and laws, those are the things that the examiners enforce for their state. So for state registered firms, if that answers your question.
Got it. And that is what explains the difference between Minnesota's requirement for 3 years of experience and maybe a different Washington State's view of the monthly retainer model. Is that what ultimately creates the differences between the states?
Yeah, so with the states now, some of the differences, yes and no. So I guess the states look at their citizens. They look at things get bubbled up, what's important. So who's ever the director or the head of the department that regulates securities, sometimes it's what's important to them. Okay. So what's important to them becomes the agenda or the direction or the vision of the department. So every state is kind of like politics, right? You always have two different parties or multiple parties. Well, within these states, whichever, and I'm not going to use party, but whichever the most important criteria in the investment community for that department, it becomes their viewpoint on certain things. So you mentioned Washington, right? Well, they have a viewpoint that like ongoing financial planning fees, right? Well, another state, we'll say Minnesota, they understand that model and the heads of their department believe in it. Now, I don't know why they believe in it. Maybe their investments may be under that model. You never know. But they believe in that model, so they don't have an issue with it. So therefore, the issues and the concerns and the viewpoint of the examiner is the viewpoint of the top of the department. So there's going to be inconsistencies. And then another thing would be the amount of fees. So in a state where we'll say California, where there's ultra high net worth individuals by the masses, well, they can justify a 3%, AUM fee versus a more blue collared state that would be considered egregious and excessive fees. So maybe 1.25% would be the highest fee that would be acceptable by the regulators. So some of it is citizen and client driven, and then the others are just interpretations of SEC's model rule.
So fascinating. So fascinating. What relationship do the state regulators have with each other from state to state? Do they ever have any interaction?
So NASA, North American Securities Administration Association, that is a community where regulators communicate. Regulators have annual conferences where they come together as a body of one. It's a community where they have subcommittees where regulators talk about certain specific areas that are impacting the investment advisor community. So, for example, a subcommittee could be on fees and compensation, and then they can have one on supervision, And they can have another subcommittee on impending laws or regulations. So regulations that haven't came into law yet. And regulators, they try to get out in front, and they typically look to, as a community, come together and decide, how are we going to examine this new law? What kind of procedures are we going to put to investigate and regulate this new law? In this community, they have a system, which I like to call CRM, and their CRM is called NEMO, NEMO. And this CRM allows them to communicate electronically regarding different advisory firms, different investment advisor representatives within these firms. And the reason that they would do this is because as the community is growing, there's advisors that are registered in multiple states. And when you have multi-state firms, well, sometimes you overlap into different regulatory jurisdictions, and they want to make sure that you are, or your firm is, in compliance with the home state, and you're not violating any of your current or your home state statutes or regulations.
Totally fascinating. So the regulators have their own CRM where they're taking notes about each of the advisors. This is going to cause lots of our advisors to stress out, I'm sure. But I guess let me clarify with you, Kingston. In what cases are folks taking notes in Nemo about different advisors? I mean, is it every call that an advisor makes to clarify something, or is it just big red flags? Or are regulators really zoning in on each and every advisor firm out there and taking notes on any issues they see?
They are not taking issues with each and every firm. They are documenting any red flags, any regulatory action that has been taken up until this point on that firm, and any enforcement action, any fines, fees, things of that nature. Those are the kind of things that they're doing. Anything that directly impacts the public. It's kind of like a public service announcement for regulators.
Got it. I want to ask this just because a lot of our member advisors ask this question or have shown some concern around contacting regulators. I've heard members say, I don't want to reach out to my regulator with a question because I don't want them to flag me and then give me an audit. Does it work like that?
No, absolutely not. Members, please reach out to your regulator. Your regulators are here to help you to be compliant or stay compliant. They're there to educate you. Now, they are not your friend, but they are there to help you. And calling them is not going to trigger an examination unless you call them and told them that you've committed gross misconduct against your clients. Anything short of that, you'll be fine. The regulators, they map out what firms typically map out their examinations for the next year at the end of the fiscal year of the current year. So when January starts, they already know X amount of firms and who those firms are that are going to be examined, and they have them on a schedule.
Interesting. Got it. Okay. XYPN members, those of you who have asked me this before or alluded to being scared to contact a regulator, you've heard it first from Kingston. You don't have to be afraid of that. So Kingston, going back to this audit, say they're in your living room, they've asked you for a number of different documents. Walk us through, is it one regulator or are there multiple there? What should an advisor expect once they are at your place of business?
You can expect a team of regulators. Now, there's some states do allow one regulator, but typically they come in teams of two, just in case, you don't want a situation where it's one man and one woman, alone, just for safety and liability reasons. You'll usually, I should say, have more than one. If it's a place of business and not a home office, then you can have one regulator. But if you work from home, you'll always have two showing up at your house. The reason being, one regulator can ask questions while the other one can take notes.
Mm.
That's the kind of the just behind that. Now, what can you expect? Now, the regulator they're in your house. You can expect them to give you a business card. You can expect them to ask for one of yours. You can expect them to ask you, once you've given them the required documentation that they've asked for, to ask you to leave the room and give them some privacy to review those documents.
Mm.
And at that point, the regulators already know what they know. Now they need to corroborate that what they know is accurate, or what you've provided is accurate. So they're going to dig a little deeper. That's what they're there to do.
Interesting. And what are, I guess, walk me through that digging deep. So you've given them the documents that they wanted. One document says you're going to do quarterly reviews. The other says, oh, look, maybe you haven't completed those quarterly reviews. What's the dialogue between the regulators at that point? And what do they do behind the closed doors?
Sure. So the door is closed. They'll take a sample size of clients, usually anywhere from 1 to 10% of your clients. And those are the files that you would give them. They're looking for complete client files. So prior to them arriving, you've given them a sample of your ADV, part 1, part 2. You've given them your client agreement, a sample client agreement. You've given them your written supervisory procedures. So they've reviewed them and they've highlighted some things on there. They want to make sure that the written supervisory procedures, the ADV, and the client agreement all corroborate. Now, they're not sure if they corroborate until they get there. So then you give the client, say, John Smith. You give them John Smith's file. One, they want to see that file is complete. Is there suitability information within the file? Did you capture that? Did you capture the annual reviews that you say you do? Or did you not document it? Or did you not do them at all? Did you capture the holdings report that you say that every investment advisor representative has to document their holding reports on your compliance manual, and you don't see any holding reports? But more specifically with the client file, they're looking for any correspondence with you and that client, any complaints where they documented, risk tolerance. They're looking for anything that's just complete that you would have in a client file. You'd be surprised how many advisors don't document their interactions with clients. So, and this is important because fast forward 5 years go by, or 10 years go by, and you've never been examined, and they finally show up. This client has been a client of yours for 10 years, and then you produce a file, and when the examiner opens the file, it says that the client works for the state of Montana, and their risk tolerance is aggressive, and they want to golf when they retire, right? So you're looking at the file. Oh, and their driver license is dated 2011. Well, it's 10 years forward. It's 2019, or I'll say it's 2021. And you don't have updated client information. That client no longer works. And you say you do quarterly reviews. You would have documented that in a quarterly review that, by the way, your client retired, and you would have updated their file that they were in retirement and that they're living this golf life now. So those are the kind of things. Know your client. That's a fiduciary responsibility. And they want to make sure that you're doing those things. And because they've only taken a sample size of your clients, and we'll say 1%, that means it's safe to say if you haven't kept good books and records on one client, then we may need to look at more clients, because you probably haven't done them for the rest of them as well.
Very, very, very interesting. Tell me about some of your do's and don'ts when interacting with a regulator.
Wow.
Yeah, be as open and honest and as deep as you need to be able to give our listeners a real good understanding of these folks aren't your friends, but they
Yes.
definitely have hearts. So I guess tell us a little bit about the do's and don'ts.
Okay, so a don't. Don't elaborate in areas that don't need elaboration. So if it's a yes or no question, then simply provide a yes or no answer. If it's open-ended but direct, open-ended question based on a single topic, well, be specific with your answer on that topic. Do not provide, when I say unnecessary information, like backstories that have no value, that add no value. So make sure you're providing value added answers to very specific questions. For example, if the examiner says, "What color is the sky?" Just say it's blue. Or you would say, don't say, well, based on the day and the way the wind is blowing, it's violet, or it might be sky blue. I don't know. Well, you're giving the examiner a window into, depending on the wind blowing, you may charge 3% or you may charge 1%. Which one is it? So just that kind of thing. So don't do that. Be very direct. Yes, no, and I don't know answers would be something that I would say do. And another thing not to do is don't be unorganized. Please be organized. Another don't, or do, know your business in and out. And when I say know your business, know the information that is in your documentation that you provide to clients. So any client provided documentation, make sure you know it, you've read it, and you understand it, because that could cause issues for you. And I know I'm an example. I like to give examples. An example would be, I would show up. So I've done over 100 examinations. And one of the most common things that I would see that is a don't, I would ask for the compliance manual, and the compliance manual would still have the blanks in the template where you're supposed to add your firm name or the state that you're in. Or right then and there, I know that you've never even read it, and you've probably haven't even implemented a compliance program. So don't do that. And another one is, don't play with the temperature. In the middle of the winter, I had a guy put the thermostat down to like 60 and tried to freeze me out of his office because he didn't want me to dig too deep into his books and records. So I was in there with a hat and gloves, freezing. And so as a result, a 1-day examination became a 4-day examination. I came back three days in a row. Well, what ends up happening is, the longer the examination goes, it disrupts your business. Okay. So you want to be open and forthcoming as possible. That is a definite do. Another don't is, do not be argumentative. Do not be aggressive. Be open and inviting. They truly are there to help you, and keep an open mind of that, and be mindful that they don't want to be there any more than you want them there.
Interesting. So as they wrap up the audit, what should advisors expect? And how long does the look back period count for? I mean, how deep are they going to go? Is there a statute of limitations that if you screwed up in the first year, but you're in year 5, maybe it doesn't matter? I guess talk to us about kind of post completion of the audit. What do advisors expect?
Okay. So you asked a couple questions, but statute of limitations on that initial examination notice, it tells you the examination period. It could be anywhere from a year to 24 months. So they're only worried about what happened during that period. That's the scope of their exam. Now, when they're wrapping up the examination, you can expect the examiners to tell you all known deficiencies that they've uncovered. They'll tell you, the only thing that they won't tell you is fraud. Okay, so fraud will get referred to their enforcement division. But before they leave, they'll let you know that, hey, we uncovered this, we uncovered that, and all of these things will be disclosed to you in our deficiency letter that you'll receive in no later than 30 days. And then at that time, you will have 30 days, or you'll have 15 to 30 days to review and respond to the deficiencies. And the response should basically be that you've corrected it, or it will be corrected within X amount of days. So you want to be specific when you're going to have these deficiencies resolved. And in some cases, they'll give you a deadline to when they need to be resolved. And that'll have to, and if it's a lot of things, then you may want to reach out. Then they may say you may want to reach out to a consultant. And they'll also let you know what will happen in that letter, in the event that you're still deficient in these areas.
I think a lot of XYPN members worry that the regulator will shut them down during the audit, that they'll just say that they have not kept up with their compliance responsibilities and therefore they should no longer be an owner of a firm. Does that happen?
It can, but not for routine compliance. That would only happen if you are gross negligent and your clients are at serious risk of either serious financial risk, or fraud. Those are the only three reasons that would happen. So fraud, serious financial risk, or gross negligence. Anything that's just regular routine compliance, you will still be a going concern and still be a thriving business. You'll just have to work on correcting the issues that you have.
Got it. Okay. So you've performed over 100 audits in your experience. What, I guess, could you share some examples of audits gone wrong?
Sure. Example of audit gone wrong would be a client that is not keeping current books and records, and that is verbatim statute. Statute says you must keep and retain current books and records. So not keeping current books and records, not maintaining either their bond or their minimum balance requirement, not properly disclosing outside business activities. So you are a firm owner, but you do a job, you work a job on the side. Well, you need to disclose that to your clients. So, they need to know that you're managing their assets part-time, or whatever percentage of time. So uncovering those, having not properly securing books and records. So if you're a home office, the office door doesn't lock, and the desk drawers where you keep client sensitive information, they don't lock. So one of the things that an examiner tip is when they ask you to show them your office, we just tug on the drawer to see if it opens.
Wow.
If it opens for me, then it opens for everyone that lives in this house. Let's see here. So I've seen that during my examinations, and then not properly supervising your either administrative workers or other investment advisor representatives. You're not documenting their outside business activities. There was a situation where, a firm, one member is an ex-wire, right? So they're fee only, but they hired and brought in another investment advisor representative that's not fee only. You gotta document and disclose that. Well, that individual would do on their part 2B of their firm brochure that they're not fee only. But then again, that means that the firm is not fee only at that point. So the firm can't say I'm fee only, but yet you have non-fee only investment advisor representative. So I've ran into situations like that. And then just negligent and just unaware and not involved with, the overall compliance piece of the business, because that's the part that is it's not most important, but it's very important to keeping your doors open and preventing fraud from happening to your clients. If the messier you are, then the messier your clients' relationships in the eyes of a regulator are. So those are some of the things that I've seen as a regulator. And then I haven't come across theft, but I have come across negligence. And negligence being, you tell your custodian You send your custodian a client listing every quarter or every month, whatever frequency that you bill your clients, of what percentage to deduct from the client's account.
Mhm.
Well, you have to do your due diligence to make sure on that spreadsheet that it has the right percentages. It has the right, well, the custodian will make sure that you have the right quarter ending balance, but you need to make sure everything else is correct, because they do ultimately what you tell them to do, and that your client fees are accurately being deducted. So failing to supervise that is negligence. And actually I've seen that happen a lot. Advisor changes their fee structure
Mm.
and they forget to, well, their billing process, and they forgot to document that, notify the custodian. The custodian is still billing a different fee structure. So you want to be mindful of that. And then just knowing having an identity, knowing who your firm is, and then knowing your skills and your qualifications. So don't offer products or services that you're not knowledgeable or skilled in. A
Mm.
lot of advisors will do that because, oh, I want to do pension and profit sharing plans, but make sure you know about pension and profit sharing plans and picking funds. So those will be some of the shortcomings and some of the extensive audits that I've had in areas where people are, and I say ignorant, not in a bad way, but just ignorant on a topic or ignorant on compliance, and hence they get a lot of deficiencies.
Mm. Really, really, really good points and pieces of advice. And I think that last part that you were talking about really relates to how we just started this conversation, which is don't overpromise and underdeliver. It's a lot better to be clear about what you will be doing and how you'll be doing it in a more conservative way than just when you write your ADV saying you're going to do all this great stuff, offer all these great services, and then find out 6 months down the road, oh, well, I'm actually not qualified to offer that, or I don't have the capacity to offer that. I guess rounding out our conversation, if and when members realize that there is that deficiency, or maybe in your last example where billing had gone astray, how do folks correct that? Do they let the regulator know?
So whenever you make a mistake, it's best to catch it on your own and catch it, correct it, and document it and put that in your file. Upon an examination, an examiner will see it and they'll actually high five you for it. Okay. Because it shows that you are supervising your firm. You're on top of things. Now, if the regulator catches it, then it's not good. So I would say always disclose, document any errors that you make. It's okay to make mistakes. So let me make that clear. It's okay to make mistakes. It's perfectly okay to have a fee discrepancy. It's just what you do when you notice it, and how long did it take you to recognize it? Did the client, did they notice it first and have to tell you about it, or did you notice it first and then make sure you let the client know and then make them whole again?
Mm, great pieces of advice. How long should an advisor expect to spend preparing for and responding to and being in an audit? I don't know if you can sum that up, but
In terms of duration, what can investment advisors and investment advisor representative firm owners expect? I would say it depends on your organization. So the more compliance that your firm is, then the shorter time that it will take for you, or I don't want to say the shorter time, but typically 1 to 3 hours it'll take you to gather all your documentation and be ready for an examination. Now, the less prepared you are or the less compliant you are on a daily basis, it could take weeks to get compliant.
mm,
And the issue with that, if it takes weeks, then it means that while you're gathering your documentation, you're trying to become compliant and you're backtracking by correcting documentation that should have been, correct from the start. And that could be a long, tedious process. One of the tricks that examiners often do, and they know that you're not prepared because the documents that they ask for, statute says need to be readily available, meaning that you can get to them in a short period of time, is if they go on your website and they see that your office hours are 8 to 5, well, at 4:45, they'll give you a call and say, hey, surprise examination tomorrow. If they show up tomorrow and your eyes are bloodshot red, they know you were up all night gathering documentation. They weren't readily available and you don't have a culture of compliance. So what can advisors do to make sure that this doesn't happen? One of the tools you can do is you can hire a compliance consultant that can work with you on either an ad hoc basis or work with you on an ongoing basis. Another tool that some of the best exams that I've ever been on and I've ever conducted, they engage in mock examinations at least once a year. And what that does, that mock examination, you have a third party or a consulting firm, they come in and they do a realistic examination, nuts and bolts. They go through your firm and they let you know where you're deficient, where you're compliant, high five you on the things that you need to keep doing, and highlight the things that you need to do less of and get better at. And what this does is it prepares you. You'll have a continuous, perpetual state of being compliant and being examination ready. And I equate this to, the way I look at it is, I equate it to Michael Jordan. He was the best basketball player in the world. But guess what? He had a shooting coach. And his shooting coach would work him out and perfect his imperfections. And his examination was the game, it was the playoffs, and it was the championships. And he delivered every single time. So that's how you look at your compliance program. It's not a check the box activity. It's a culture. And the more you embrace it, or those of who embrace it, they welcome friendly conversations with examiners. They welcome face-to-face examinations, audits. There's nothing to hide. There's nothing to be fearful about because they're in a perpetual state of compliance.
I love that analogy. And I love your confidence in members and advisors who are listening to this, that they too can have a strong compliance department so long as they embrace an attitude that works with this and that they each do the right things to get themselves organized and to stay compliant. So, Kingston, I could talk to you for hours about compliance, and I urge our listeners to come to the VIP Facebook group and drop in more questions for Kingston. And if there's more questions that listeners want to answer, I'd be happy to have Kingston back on the podcast to continue the conversation. But for now, Kingston, thank you so much for your time and your insight and your energy. And thank you so much for being a great teammate, but also a fabulous compliance consultant to our XYPN members and now a resource to all of our listeners. So thank you so much, Kingston.
You are very welcome. Thanks for having me, Maddie.
Sure. Bye-bye.
XY Planning Network's annual benchmarking survey is out. Are you curious about the average number of clients XYPN members get in their first year, or how successful niches really are? To answer these burning questions and more, we've again enlisted a professional research firm to complete our annual benchmarking study. Get your copy hot off the press and discover vital statistics such as the median advisor revenue by years in practice and sources of firm growth, from referrals to blogging, social media, and more. Head over to xyplanningnetwork.com/study to purchase your copy today.
Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with Alan and Kitsis, and finally, to find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.